No. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Can you see the screen that says A for assessment to make sure you are in the right session?
We do see it, yes.
All right, great. So all I'm gonna let you know is I have 1 or 2 slides just to give us an overview of what you're about to dive into. Today we're going to be talking about assessments, obviously, and the big thing, just 1 second, I can't move my, okay, good, we're getting there. The first thing is really understanding. You're going to understand some best practices of a community assessment and WASH. That's the common assessment we all think of when we hear that word assessment. And Tony is going to do that through really gaining, sharing his experiences a lot on the ground, what worked and what didn't. And then from our presentation, we're really hoping you're going to understand how the community assessment is also a critical part of monitoring change. So it's not just a requirement of the foundation. It actually has a very purposeful role in your project experience. And then 3, we are hoping that you can identify what to monitor in a WASH project. So we're going to take you through this project cycle, essentially, in a nutshell, in less than 30 minutes. So just real quick, you know, we traditionally think of the project life cycle as like having a beginning and end because we associate it with the grant, right? We get the grant, then it closes with some sort of money or reporting that has to happen. But today, Tony and I really want you to stop thinking linearly and start thinking more like a continuous circle. So today, really, we're going to really learn more about this community assessment and how that's part of the monitoring that we do throughout a project life cycle. In the planning and project design and implementation phase, we're really going to learn the importance of why information, whether it's qualitative or quantitative data collected, is really going to help you be able to execute to make sure that you get the change that you're wishing to see in the end. So we're going to start first with Tony with community assessments, and then we're going to go ahead and bridge over to myself from community assessments to the monitoring portion. So I'm going to turn this over to Tony for the community assessment.
Hello, everybody. I'm not able to see you. I hope we have a full room, but I like to start my my presentations by talking with the crowd to have an understanding of who we're talking to. But in this case, well, you know, we're too far away. I'm in Santa Rosa de Copan in Honduras, so it will be kind of difficult for me to be there and share personally. But it's a good thing we have Zoom because we can talk this way. Well, let me start by introducing my family. My wife, Nairobi, is a Rotarian from Puerto Cortes, and my daughter, Valentina, she is also a big participant in all our meetings. So she's becoming a Rotarian as we go. Well, where do we start? Like any other Rotarian around the world, we like to service our community. So the first thing is that we start dreaming of what we want to do. And in those dreams, we come up with all kinds of ideas. Well, that's a good thing. Let's continue dreaming. But let's evaluate those ideas and share them with your club. Make sure that your ideas go along with the plans of your club and your district, and try to get a group of other Rotarians that think the same way. That's really important because then, you know, we go with the evaluation of the whole thing. You know, hey, we have an idea. How do we put it to work? Well, let's plan. And the part that we're talking about here is that research, that pilot or that full scale evaluation. That's part of your plan. That's important to have. So let's talk about that a little bit. Well, we have a community that have different ideas. Some think about toilets, some think about water tanks. Well, others think about fixing the road, which is got nothing to do with water and sanitation. So we got to talk to the community. What are they dreaming about? What do they want for the community? Well, it's important that when we submit an application for a grant with the foundation, we have a good evaluation of our project. And part of that is, well, how do we make it sustainable? Well, let's get the community involved. So part of this is evaluating your community. So you need to make sure that you have the proper assessment. Okay, that's part of your design. That's part of everything that you got to do. All right. So sustainability is a big thing, not only for the foundation, but that's something that we all have to think about it, because we put in the resources, and we want to make sure that those resources last for a long time. So how do we make sure of that? Well, we got to get involved with the community. It's not just making that research about, hey, what do you want? Well, we got to find out if they have local resources. Do they have materials that they can provide? I mean, their parts. Instead of bringing parts from the US, there might be easier access to the parts here in case they need to fix something. So that's important. Let's find out what the local community has. So work with your local Rotarians. Work with your community. Try to find out what the strengths, the weaknesses, the needs, and what the assets that they got, okay? That will give you a very clear picture of where we're standing with your project. Where do we need to work on? How do we need to fix that on that? Okay, so this is probably a very crucial part of your design. So the community assessment identifies where our support is needed the most. And that's really, really what we want to find out, okay? Make sure you go and talk to them. Maybe you want to make a trip and work with your local Rotarians just to make sure, even though it might be kind of expensive to make that initial trip just to make the assessment, but I encourage you to do that, because then, you're going to have access to your local Rotarians. You're going to meet the group that you're going to be working with, and it will be much easier. Once you establish that relationship, things work smoother. So you'll see. And many of you probably have that experience that, when you make that personal contact, things work much better. All right. So we find out what the community wants. We can do that by having a meeting. This is a picture of a community that we had a meeting with prior to starting our project. But also, find out what they got. Make a survey, because sometimes the meetings only, 10% or 15% of the people show up. So you need to go deeper and find out what they really want. It's hard to get 100% of them, but try to get at least the majority of them. So when you are questioned, you say, well, we got an answer from the majority of the people. That's crucial. Remember that, we're Rotarians, believe in democracy, and we want to help people applying the same rules of democracy, majority rules. So we'll work with your local partner to do the proper assessment, get with them, make a plan with them on what kind of questions you want to ask, and let them go there and work with the community and find out, what the community really wants. By learning about the community, you'll find the best opportunities for servers and maximize your ability to make an impact. If an assessment has already been done, okay, like in some cases, in fact, Steve and I been working with DRI to do an assessment, and that was a a very informative study that DRI helped us with. So we already have that for our project. Now, the foundation, keep this in mind, is our way of having a good control of our projects. I know that we could go alone without the foundation. We can probably find money in different ways, but working with the foundation help us to protect the projects because they have worked a great deal to make the rules of engagement. So working with the foundation is what we recommend. Now, the foundation will not consider projects without a community assessment. So keep that in mind. We want to make sure each Rotary member has a responsibility to ensure that foundation funds are carefully managed. Anyone involved in a grant project bears a special responsibility for the safekeeping of Rotary grant money. So it's important that we work with the foundation because the foundation help us to do it better. So going back to Erica, let's keep this conversation open, and I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions to talk about.
I love it. Thank you, Tony. That was wonderful. I really want to make a big deal about this first step with community assessment is absolutely imperative. In fact, the foundation no longer accepts any application that is not able to demonstrate the assessment that was done in the field and the resulting data. So I'm going to just quickly go from the momentum that Tony gave us to go from the assessment and a few things from the Rotary Foundation that I think you will benefit from for those of you that are utilizing funds from the foundation or in just a general. Okay, let me just go right where we left off. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, oops. Sorry, little technical difficulty. All right, we're up and running. Okay, so building off of what Tony talked about with the community assessment is looking back on that project cycle. This is the simplified circular cycle that we were looking at before. And this is really the foundational part of the entire process that we need to think about. Now, no longer in Rotary do we want you to think that, okay, I complete the cycle and I'm done and I'm out. No way. One thing that, Tony did emphasize, and I absolutely agree with him, is we really want to be, especially nationals that are in country that are Rotarians, we want us to take stewardship of the relationships that we've created through these projects, which means that when the grant cycle ends, let's say you get a global grant or maybe a programs of scale grant, when that grant cycle ends, does that mean that our relationships completely end with the communities and the governments that we've befriended? No, we are essentially part of the system. And that's what I would like our brains to really get embedded in. We are part of the system. So this first step of community assessment is a perfect opportunity to get that foundational information, or what we call baseline information. We can't monitor our progress unless we have a point of reference. That's why that community assessment, which is essentially a snapshot of the community where they are at that time. And that way, when we complete the implementation part of our project cycle, we're able to compare against the baseline. Okay, next slide. So I want to just really emphasize that we don't want to just focus on the deficiencies in a community, and that's what Tony was saying. It's really, he kept emphasizing assets, and I heard, today the letter of the day is A, right? Assessments and assets. So every community has an asset, and we need to see that instead of saying what is absent in a community. So if there is strong leadership, for example, in the community, that's a perfect starting point to realize and foundational point of the community to ensure that change is going to happen. Okay. Now at the Rotary Foundation, to help you do those assessments, we do have a variety of resources. So raise your hand if you know that that Rotary has assessment tools available for you at myrotary.org. Raise your hand. Okay, and that means virtually too. You can raise your hand virtually. So not many. So we have Rotary assessment tools and guidelines. This first one is found, you can see at myrotary.org, and you can click on this link. You'll have access to this presentation afterward. This is a fabulous tool because it tells you of different things of how to conduct a focus group. How do you really do a community mapping exercise, which is really essential for water, sanitation, and hygiene. It's a wonderful tool. It's been updated and it gives you step by step on how to conduct different types of community assessments. What we want to see is a more formal way of gathering information. The relationship with the community is first and foremost. But other than just saying we met with the community and they said they needed water and sanitation, well, that's the first step. But what more about the context, the environment, can we find out from you as Rotarians? So take a look at this tool. It's a fabulous tool. I'm going to leave you to that tool, and if you have any questions, please reach out to me. Another great one is Wash in Schools tends to be a very popular type of project type. So we do have a Rotary assessment tool for Wash in Schools. Okay, this is a fabulous tool because it's broken up into different sections about who are the key stakeholders that you are able to touch base with. So is it the school management committee, parents, and school administrators? You pick which ones you really want to devote your time and resources to. And this really helps gear you toward the types of questions that would be most appropriate to ask, the standard questions, if you are not familiar already of how to do a community assessment in a school. Okay, so this just gives you a little snapshot of the type of survey information or questions to ask these different types of stakeholders. All right, the next tool that will help you do a community assessment and design your project is the water sanitation hygiene guidelines. And we say for global grant funding, but in general, these are the guidelines that we hope all Rotarians, whether they're just doing service projects or if they're just doing, I just say just, but a program of scale, it doesn't matter. These are the best practices that we insist that Rotarians integrate with whatever form of service that they are doing. We just updated these guidelines, especially for water, sanitation, and hygiene. The sustainability guidelines that Tony had referenced to, those are within this particular document. So there should be no questions. As you're writing your grant, make sure, or an application, or designing your project of any sort, make sure that you look at these guidelines. It'll tell you exactly what you need for your community assessment in order to articulate for funding. That's only one area, but we're going to cover today. I'm going to pluck out those guidelines specifically to the community assessment and really quickly show you which ones you need to make sure that you include in your application. So real quickly, we want to make sure that we're giving the context for the reader. So a lot of our regional grant officers have substantial field experience, however, not specific to maybe where you are working at. So you have to give them the context. You know, what is the government involvement? Some of us work with municipalities, others of us work with regional offices. Some of us work with Department of Education, and some of us work with Department of, or the the Ministry of Environment. So we really need to bring that context into our community assessment. Next, we need to talk about the water source availability and the quality of water. We need to do a kind of an inventory of the WASH infrastructure and its functionality, because that really gives us an idea of if they already have WASH infrastructure and it's non-functional or not cared for, that gives us a big idea of where the gaps are in the larger system that we're proposing to work in. For example, is there going to be a strong management committee? And that's another question we're asking here. Oops. Is the management committees and systems that exist, are they active? Do they demonstrate leadership? If they are active, then why is the existing infrastructure at a bad state, right? Then the next thing, home hygiene promotion and behaviors practice. This is really important because we don't want to just give standard hygiene promotion or standard menstrual hygiene promotion in our projects. We would like it to be tailored to address the behaviors that we wish to see a change in. When we say we, I mean the community. So those hygiene, like, is there an existing hygiene promotion campaign going on? Maybe by UNICEF within the community that you're working in? We don't want to counteract that. We want to be aware of what's going on. Are people washing their hands at proper times? Do we see if they have filtration units in their homes, are they actually treating those with care so they're not contaminating the water that they're filtrating? So the last two are really key. And these are the two that I do not see in most community assessments. And we have to go back to many of Rotarians to say, tell us what were some of the behaviors, the perceptions, the attitudes, or even taboos pertaining to water sanitation and hygiene that exist in the community right now. And which of those will be challenges for creating a positive behavior change that you wish to see? We need to really understand those things, especially if we're working, let's say, with sensitive topics like menstrual hygiene management. So this is really key for the host Rotarians to have a very key role in this sort of activity, because they are locals and they understand more the systems and how to communicate, especially around these topics. And finally, the financing for WASH. Are people paying for water, sanitation, or hygiene, or are they not? Are they being subsidized by the government? This is really important information to get at the front end. Now I'm going to go ahead and, just like I said, this is going to be a really quick overview, not an in-depth type of training for monitoring. But now that we have the community assessment, which really provides us that baseline or foundation, we can now go into designing a project and implementing it in order to obtain the change we wish to see. But we have to be very clear at the front end. What is that change we, the community, wish to see in the end of all this activity? This question has to be answered right at the beginning, at the planning stage. And this is why I don't like to see just monitoring at the end of our project. It actually starts at the very beginning. We need to think about what is the change we wish to see and how are we going to monitor it, okay? So now this comes to, what do we monitor? So if we can answer that first question, it's the same question, just phrased differently. If we say, I know I would like to see students washing their hands at the appropriate times during a day. So if that is the change I wish to see, I need to make sure that my project design has specific activities that are going to lead to that particular outcome, okay? So here at the foundation, we have a big push. We're going forward from this year until 2025. We're going to be introducing the requirement that we would like to see clubs and districts start to monitor the changes that are resulting from the activities they're implementing in their projects. And is this just another bureaucratic ask that we're doing for all of you? And the answer is no. not actually. We're doing this because we want you to see and know what parts are successful and what parts are not successful of your project. So can we claim that we're actually creating this decrease of diseases in the schools? How can we show that we're really doing that? Okay. How do we know it's not the result of, you know, a deworming effort that was going on simultaneously from our water and sanitation efforts at the school? So this is the little step-by-step. We want to think of this as going from inputs out to impact. We always want to be thinking about the big change that could occur if we had all the resources that we needed and we were able to complete all the activities that we're proposing to create that change, right? So I want us to take a good look at this. The input is what exactly it is the resources that are invested in a project. So that can be volunteer time, the global grant money that you get, the training, the materials that are needed for that training. An output is this immediate result of the project, right? This can be like people that are trained and materials that are delivered, maybe a product that is delivered like a filtration device into a home or household, right? Those are the immediate, almost tangible results of the project. Then we have what's called an outcome. And this is the short-term or intermediate result of a project. We can think of this as like behaviors that are created and actions that are resulting as a result of the specific activities that we do in a project. These outcomes usually don't show themselves until about maybe a year or 2 years after the project is quote unquote implemented. So this is why it's so important for us as Rotarians to continue those relationships even when grant cycles end, because if you really want to know the type of change that your project created, you need to check for the long term. And then last but not least, this word impact that we all use, right? The thing is when we think of impact, this is really that positive long-term change that results from our actions and activities. This tends to be something that's very aspirational, and it's very difficult to measure with the type of resources that we tend to have within our Rotary projects. So for that reason, the Rotary Foundation from this point forward is really encouraging Rotarians to focus on the outputs and ideally the outcomes. Once again, that's the outputs, the immediate results of a project, and the outcomes. Okay. And again, none of this can be done unless you have that baseline and community assessment. So there's such a strong tie there. So I just want to give you a quick example of wash in schools. Many of us do wash in schools. So oftentimes it helps to put it in context. If I was designing a wash in school project, the first thing I would think about, okay, this particular school really wants to bring more girls back to school during their menses, right? And we have a big problem in school of kids open defecating in the bush, and they have to bring water from home to the school. So we want to focus on our outputs, which are our immediate results, which we need to get teachers trained in this particular school, and MHM management and behavior change, right? So we're really making sure those teachers have that foundational training, and that will be continued after teacher, right? And next is the construction of gender segregated toilet blocks. And we're going to we're going to connect the school to the municipal water system, okay? So those are our immediate outputs. This is what we can do right away and we can see. So start to think a little bit is, if these are my outputs of the project, then how would I measure my success at achieving those outputs? So I'm going to just let you think about that a little bit as we go to outcome. Now, outcomes are those long-term changes, like I said, behavior change. So from the outputs, the immediate like construction that we're doing and training that we're doing, what are we hoping will happen in the long term? So we're hoping we're going to have increased hand washing at proper times among the students. We're going to hope that there's continued access to safely managed water services, and that they'll have improved access to basic sanitation services. This is the long term. This is once things are going and people are able to use the facilities in a way that will be beneficial to them. Now, ultimately, the impact, and if I'm a small little project, let's say around $30,000, I know that I'm not going to have the resources to truly be able to assess my impact. But what I'm hoping still in my mind is that I'm doing these activities ultimately for what reason? What specific reason is likely to come from the specific activities that I talked about earlier? So in this case, we can think of impact as truly being increased student attendance, particularly girls. And we're not going to see that until perhaps a year, 2 years, 3 years, depending on the context, right? And then ideally, we'd like to see a decreased incidence of reported absences due to diarrheal diseases. That sounds fantastic, right? But we really need to have time to be able to assess that change. So I just want us to have an idea. I want us all to be thinking always about what impact are we having, no matter how small our projects or how large our projects. I want us to be thinking about where can I at least measure my outputs, and possibly will I make the effort to measure my outcome, even when the grant ends? And what will I measure? So the first key here, like I said, is we have to identify what our outputs and outcomes are before we actually measure. Now, for those of us who don't have, I don't know how to define an indicator or a key performance indicator, there's lots of terms for the measure. Well, I have some good news, and that is that Rotary is developing standard indicators that are going to help fit the type of project that you're doing. And the goal is that you will be able to see these indicators, and just like the little ladder that I showed you before, the colorful ladder, we've taken each of these project types and placed them along the ladder. So from outputs to outcomes, and eventually, for those of you that are incredibly ambitious and wealthy, we have the impact indicator down here, and this is for community water supply. So the idea is that we would not expect Rotarians to do impact or even some of these outcomes, but at least the output is where you can all start, which is counting, for example, number of trainings or number of water supply systems. But we know that Rotarians always go above and beyond, and this is what we're hoping to create, is the importance to be able to try and plan to measure for that next step up, that outcome that we talk about. And these standard indicators will be released actually in 1 year, less than 1 year. But you all have a little sneak preview of what is to come. So I would love for all of you to, again, take this little ladder home with you in your mind, so that in your project, you can think about each one of these steps and fill out what is the outputs or the outcomes, and what am I ultimately aiming for my impact. And then you can define the actual measures you need for each one of these steps in the ladder. We don't need a lot of measures, just one is fine for each step. And you are well on your way to check if you are truly creating the change you want to see. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, we're here to start the conversation.
I have a first question here, Erica.
Yes, Tony.
I was wondering if all these indicators, the outcomes, will be available online. You know, when you do the application, you set your goals and all that. So when you're doing the report, it's much easier if you just go into that online and boom, you click on it and it's done.
Yep, that's what we're working on right now. It's like really difficult. First, we're trying to define them. And we want to make sure that they are achievable by most Rotarians. We don't want people to feel really frustrated and say, I'm not going to do service at all because I have to do these indicators. So that's why we want to make like a graduation of different indicators so that those that are really capable of measuring outcomes, like I said, those will be optional, but at least the outputs will be required and you won't have to guess. The cool thing is if we can get the system to work well is that you will just define, okay, I'm going to do a wash in schools project, and boom, the different indicators will show up and you select those indicators in which you are going to use going forward for the project. And that will be really nice. But that, like I said, that's why they're coming out in a year, because we have a lot of tech issues to work out at the beginning. But in the meantime, I wanted to let you know that we have at least the development of the indicators going on.
Great. It will be nice if you could allow for a percentage of accomplishment to be in there so that we can evaluate our project and how much we have accomplished
how far
in a period of time.
Yeah, I like that. And like I said, because this is a really great conference, because I feel like every time I come here, I'm able to at least give a preview to the folks in Denver, etc., of things that are coming down the line from the foundation to try to improve the impact or be able to talk about what we're doing, because we don't know, because we're not measuring what we're doing, we're unable to really say what type of impact we're having in the communities. So we're hoping to change that, and your suggestions, or if you're like, hey, Erica, I'd love to take a look at the indicators and let you know if these are feasible. I am open for that. I will put my email in the chat here and you can reach out.
Great.
Okay, thank you. So if you're online, you can put questions in the chat. I think there's one already. And there's one comment that the guideline assessment and sustainability are great practical tools that are already online, and that's really true. Questions come up. We have our first one right from Tony. Thanks for that, Tony. Any questions come up in here or online? If you're online, you can raise hand or probably just unmute and speak up.
I have a quick question.
Here's one.
So it kind of sounds like we're doing environmental impact statements modeled by the U.S. federal government for our project. Am I off base on thinking that? I mean, is it not sounding like environmental impact statements? You know, when the government proposes a project, be it let's say biomass fuels in the plains of Kansas, right? And we're going to see what is it that we're looking to do? Are we looking to reduce our costs, our dependency on fuels, oil, or you know, and what are those costs going to be? What's the impact going to be within that local community? How's that going to affect agriculture? Is it modeling that, or am I way off base on that?
Could you hear the question?
You can just nod and say yes. You're doing exactly what we're talking about. I'm kidding. I'll be quiet.
And you're muted, Erica. You're muted.
Oh, sorry. If you don't mind just repeating the question specifically in one sentence, that would help.
Are we kind of modeling environmental impact statements that are utilized by the federal government for meeting Congress's intent on funding projects? Is that what we're kind of doing with this?
No, so I am representing, again, Rotary International as the area focus manager for water, sanitation, and hygiene. So within Rotary International, the guidelines that I showed you, those are the guidelines on behalf of Rotary. So we, for example, the way we put this into practice is with grant funding. So we have 3 different grant types of the Rotary Foundation, actually 4. And the question is going to be going forward that you cannot just have be able to request for funds and not be able to report on the progress and the achievements that you have created through each of your projects. As for like environmental standards and guidelines, those are definitely there within each country. So again, these are globally applied. So each different country, so US environmental guidelines are very different than the Honduran or Guatemalan or Peru. We tell Rotarians that they have a responsibility to follow obviously the national guidelines first and foremost, and then the Rotary guidelines second to that. So, but the Rotary guidelines, if you take a look at them, they are more general. So they're not prescriptive or extremely rigorous that they could not be applied to most countries.
Sounds good. Thank you, Miss.
Yep.
Thank you. Other questions here or online? A question I have, Tony, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the challenges, the realistic reality challenges when you're working on the ground, trying to do a community assessment. What are some of the challenges you face as you work in Honduras?
Well, many times you think you can understand the community, and you go in there and you look at, you know, the big picture, but you don't really know what the politics behind the water board is, or whether they got the entire community behind them, or if they have a good relationship with the patronato, or, you know, what have you. And that makes it difficult, because you're working with the water board, and the water board signs your memorandum of understanding, and they say, oh yeah, we're gonna get all the people to collaborate with unskilled labor, you know, and then we go and plan our project. We're gonna utilize unskilled labor from the community, and then we go back to them and say, okay, tomorrow we're gonna need 10 people, and only 3 people show up. You know, what do you do? You know, and that's the kind of thing that goes on. You know, you believe in what the water board tells you, but you really have to go more in depth with the community and try to get a bigger percentage of participation from the get-go. I mean, the community has to give you an okay, not just the water board or the of the leadership. It's got to be the community. So you got to get closer to the community. That makes it a little bit harder. Mm-hmm. But, you know, if they don't understand what's going on, the community start giving you some negative vibes, and that's not good. You know, if people have to be behind your project, and getting that support, only you get it if you get everybody involved. If you don't, you know, you're always going to have that dispute. And another thing is, you don't know the governance. How do they elect their new officers? Do they rotate the officers in the water board? You don't know that. So you got to understand that and be really involved. I mean, you don't have to get involved in politics at all, you know, and I don't recommend it. You know, stay away from that. But you got to understand it, because then many questions come up, and if you don't understand what's going on, you know, you can make the wrong claims. So I recommend that you really understand how the community works and operates, and how much involvement you get from everybody, you know. So that's the biggest challenge I have discovered so far, you know, because we believe in what the water board says, and then boom, we have a hard time. I mean, we have a project right now that should have been finished in 1 year, and here we are, you know, 1 year and 8 months later, just because we've been very slow. The supply of labor and skilled labor has not been good. So that's one thing that I can relate to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I would also say, you know, oftentimes we as Rotarians will go to the district education office or water office and say, hey, what are the priority communities that you're gearing toward? And they'll give you a list of communities, and then you'll pick a few and then submit it as a grant. And that's a big red flag for us, simply because of practice. That I'm not saying don't align with government, of course, definitely align. But oftentimes the government doesn't have enough resources or the political will to reach some of those communities that they've classified in a certain way. So they either haven't done an assessment themselves in a long, long time, or else there also can be political undertones of which communities to prioritize. So it's good to take that and then take that information and follow up directly with the community assessment in the community, because then you can recognize, oh, they do have access to water supply here that had happened some time ago. You know, what's going on here? So there often is a completely, not completely, but often very different story from the next level up. And that goes even at the school. If you talk to just the headmaster has a different view of the school oftentimes, and you'll then start to get more of a reality if you talk directly to the teachers and even more so to the students. So you can really get a broad view, right? Everybody has a piece of the puzzle. That's what Tony's saying. And that's really, really imperative.
Thank you. Other questions? Well, it sounds like that when we talk about community assessments, the Rotary does outline that very nicely in the materials they have, community meetings, you want to do a survey, different ways of doing that. And so it seems like we're talking about a multi-step process, certainly not a one-off process. And then you talk about the getting baseline data. When I think of community assessment, I think of that looking at what their priorities are for what the projects they want. But baseline seems like a different step. Is it? Am I thinking wrong? How do you do those two sides of it to get a baseline, for example?
Yeah, baseline can come either at the time of the community assessment or it can be after. Really, the community assessment oftentimes I think is the most essential part, because it's about engagement and creating demand with the community themselves and really understanding the context you're going to be working in. Once you have that, then you're able to do the baseline, and the baseline can be very, very simple. If you keep it simple, like these 5 things we're going to be looking for changes in, like identify those things, or you could even do 3. Start very small, and most importantly, that baseline should be done by the community themselves alongside you, or your implementing partner. The reason being is that they need to see the conditions and how they change over time. So if they are they have to be engaged, first of all, in order to be able to do that baseline step. And then when they are engaged, they're going to develop much more ownership as they start to be able to monitor the changes themselves. And that's really about community mobilization and engagement, and it's so critical because when we have an organization driving the project themselves with minimal engagement, or even Rotarians who are very zealous, they happen to be civil engineers, bada boom, bada bing, they create whatever is going to create that change, but then it ends up failing in the end, or not being utilized, even though when you thought that the community wanted it. So it's really, really key for that community engagement. Community assessment and prioritization of needs really happens at the front end. And then yes, baseline is almost kind of like a subset step, of that assessment process. But it doesn't have to be a completely new re-engagement. It really can be coupled.
Yeah, you got to keep in mind that it's all about the people. Even though we're building something, or a water tank or distribution system, but it's all about the people. And you might be surprised sometimes that you want to do something good for them, but that's not what they need. And if you don't do your job of finding out exactly what's going on, you might be surprised and how negative the community can even though you're doing something good for them, they feel that that's not what they need, and so they get negative. So it's very important. It's all about the people.
So, I'm sorry to interrupt. So we would call that scoping, and it would be like putting the telescope up and looking around and avoiding those billboards that are put up by maybe the government or the local leadership, or, you know, maybe doing something on different shifts if the women are working in the factory on third shift or something, and just really putting forth the effort to see what exactly are those community or that local area needs. But I think the term we would use in the federal government, and I'm sorry to go back to the feds again, would be considered scoping to get the wide area to open it up and see what exactly is going on here and to avoid those billboards. But, and that I think is what would bring forth the needs. What do the press level, I think it is, what do the individuals, what are they looking for? But I'm not as smart as I look. I'm not working for NASA, right? Okay.
Question, and you kind of brought it up, but you always go in and somebody gives you a project, and let's say it's for water. But have you had many instances where you go in and they say, I need water, but as you do your assessment, you find out that water isn't really what they need, there's something else? Can you give us some examples or some thoughts about that?
Tony, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting because a lot of times the funds that are available from developing countries and well, you know, that's where the money comes for the projects. They have their mindset for a specific type of project, and they say, well, you know, we have the money, but we want you to do filters because we got all this money and all these projects and all this people involved, and we want to put the filters in. So we got to go look for the community that needs the filters. Well, you know, what happened if no community is really needed of filters, and what they actually need are water tanks. And we go back to the donor and say, look, you know, nobody needs filters, but there's a whole bunch that need water tanks. Well, you know, sorry, but we got the money for filters, not for water tanks, you know? And so a lot of times, you know, it's just so difficult for us to find resources to do the projects. And sometimes we got to be accommodating in a certain way, but that's wrong. And I encourage people to really, you know, if it's not possible, just, you know, there's going to be more donors somewhere that we can find money for the tanks or for the wells or for whatever is needed. So don't just, you know, set your mind because we have a technology that we want to implement, but if it's not needed, don't do it. Don't do it because it's a waste of money. And so even though the money is for free, so to speak, still, you know, hey, nothing is for free. The resources are scarce and we need to take care of them.
Yeah. Erica, you have the last word. We're about out of time. Thank you. Go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, I just wanted to say real quick, you know, that's often the case, is that where we see a need as being needed more, it means that we're essentially putting our value system above the community. So the community, we really have to have a good stakeholder representation when we ask about prioritization of needs. So a good example is that I worked with a healthcare facility in the middle of Uganda, and they insisted this midwife was the clinic had a bat infestation in the ceiling. So bat droppings were dropping in the patient waiting room and even in where they were doing delivery, labor and delivery, and where they were residing. Yet what they were insisting was most important that they wanted was water and sanitation. So they had limited resources available to them, and they insisted on the water and sanitation first. And in my mind, I was like, are you kidding me? This is disease transmission waiting to happen, you know, but it was true. Like, so we followed what they needed. And there was a reason for that, because they valued clean water and sanitation above the risk of the bat droppings on themselves and their patients. Now, eventually they got to that, but they made it very clear, and we had to trust their value system and what they would prioritize. You know, you have to develop that demand before actually choosing the need, essentially. So that need has to be chosen by the community.
But that's a perfect ending. It's got to come from them. We're about to be shut off, so goodbye.